the United States was a radical experiment in something. And the most important piece of that experiment is often missed. The most important piece of that experiment is that all of the brilliance that is encoded into the Declaration of Independence, and then, as you say, codified in the Constitution, is really about building a nation that is not ethnically based, that is indifferent to your particular ancestry, and that combines us together so that we collaborate for the other reason that evolution makes people collaborate. One reason is genes. That's not a very interesting reason. The really interesting reason is that by collaborating with people and being indifferent to their genetic heritage, we all come out ahead. It's fantastically productive to participate in collaboration because there's profit to be made. And so the founders invented this melting pot, and they put together a crude set of rules for what a melting pot would look like. And that idea was so powerful that it became contagious. And so I sort of see myself now as a patriot of the West, right? I'm also a patriot of the United States, but my feeling is the West is composed of the countries that saw the brilliance of this way of organizing a society and adopted it. And I see it as very much now under threat. But in any case, we are in sort of this modern scenario where the U.S. is this incredibly powerful nation that also informally sort of speaks for and steers the West. And we have a responsibility to the globe in so doing, that the brilliance of that experiment catches on to all of the places it hasn't yet reached, and that we complete the job, that we finish the pursuit of the values that are laid out in our founding documents and the historical amendments that have been made to those documents by, for example, the Civil Rights Movement, right? That Western vision is precious, and it is our job effectively to make the case for it globally.
Interesting. I want to process that. You're making me think already. It's not something that happens every day when you're doing most of the talking like I am these days. So I think it's an interesting framing, and I agree with it. The first part, but is the obvious part, is that we're not ethnically based, right? So it's not the commonality of genetics which makes our country cohere. That, I think, alone already poses a basic challenge, right? I think, I just met with the ambassador of Hungary recently. Let's take Italy, might even be a better example. This is Giorgia Meloni. Her challenge there is, I think, less daunting than ours when it talks about Italian identity. What's it based on? It is based on a common genetic heritage. It's based on a common language. There are the things that unite mammals or higher order animals, let's just say higher mammals, the ability to have a common communication system and a common genetic lineage that creates an urge to protect those who are closest to your kin. That's at the heart of Italian identity. They're swimming in the direction of biology, right? But I think the thing or evolutionary biology, as at least it spans the animal kingdom. I think the thing that makes America interesting and hard and worth pursuing is that it's a contrarian bet against that grain. Now, the way you had of reaccommodating that in the language of evolutionary biology, and maybe even the truth of it, was by bringing this argument about collaboration so we all come out ahead. I want to think about that. It sounds a little bit revisionist to me, in a positive way, a very optimistically revisionist account. The way I see it is maybe a little less optimistically than that, because wouldn't it be neat if it actually did align with evolutionarily hardwired instincts of a different kind for collaboration, even if it wasn't the genetics? That'd be convenient, and it would certainly make my job easier as president, and the next guy's job and thereafter that much more achievable to deliver national unity if that's all there was. But I see the project as a little harder than that. I think it involves tapping into instincts that are not, and tell me if this lands poorly on your ears as an evolutionary biologist, but are maybe not the aspects of our nature that necessarily came from what you and I would think of as evolution, but are aspects of us that were not necessarily evolved because we were somehow competitively, like it was a competitive attribute in Darwinian selection, but is just a separate attribute of humanity, which sometimes runs against our interest, right? The ability to make a sacrifice. So part of your definition of patriotism. I think you're going to have to, this gets into whole Darwinian debates, assert your own conclusion many times over in order to say that was evolutionarily hardwired. And, I'm sure you could come up for the account for it. And part of that account is going to be this group theory of being in the interest of the whole group. And that's why we collaborate and we all come out ahead if we actually, equally make the sacrifice. It's like this thought experiment that Kant had about the fishermen of why everyone doesn't overfish is because they're making a short-term sacrifice for themselves that ultimately work to the benefit of the whole. But that's not the way, like I just see that part of our human nature. That's the part of our human nature that I see as endowed by our creator. And it is in us to call out what Lincoln might have referred to as the better angels of our nature, which I'm not sure came to us from evolution. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. If it did come through evolution, evolution was the tool that somebody else, maybe we'll call him God, put in us. But anyway, I think that makes the job a little bit harder because we're actually, on my account of it, running against the grain of otherwise evolutionary odds that are stacked against us.
All right. Well, we now are squarely in my home turf, and I believe I have some very good news for you that just comes with a bitter pill, right? So the bitter pill is kind of, you're intuiting it as a bigger part of the story than I think it is. Let me just put it to you this way. There are two evolutionary reasons to collaborate. One of them is genes, and the other is the profit produced by reciprocity. My argument, the one I laid out before, is that the reciprocity version of collaboration is way more dynamic and powerful, but it is also fragile, right? So when we humans collaborate because it makes sense to, and we are indifferent to our genetic relatedness or lack of it, we produce wonderful things. And in fact, it is not an accident, in my opinion, that the strange experiment that the founders built in the United States also is responsible for a huge fraction of the most important inventions that have ever been produced on Earth, right? We're talking about computers, we're talking about airplanes, right? The list of things that Americans did because they were more indifferent to race than any previous civilization is staggering. And so that is what happens when you collaborate because reciprocity is productive rather than because you're genetically related. But the problem is that it is much easier for evolution to stabilize that collaboration when times are good, when you have growth, right? And when growth fails, we break back down into those tribal alliances that are founded on something more durable. And so my fear is that the brilliant experiment that did take place in the West is now faltering because we have run up against hard limits, or at least a long dry spell in our ability to produce growth. And so that this is actually a biological flip-flop between two different biological modes of collaborating. And I will just insert one more thing there in light of what you said. You detected something exactly right, which is that the competition is the driver. And that led you to believe that possibly collaborating the reciprocity issue was maybe less biological and that we need to resist biological urges. That's not right. The fact is, we evolved to collaborate in order to compete. We collaborate to compete. So it's not an invalidation of competition. It's a type of competition.
Interesting.
And so the bitter pill is that we face the breakdown of our very dynamic system, our very unique and proven system in the West, the fairest civilization, I would argue, that has ever existed. We face the breakdown of it into something more familiar from history, far less fair, far less dynamic, and far less capable.
Mm-hmm. For the purpose of this discussion, are you okay if we just stick to America versus the West?
Sure.
Okay. I know it doesn't change your thesis. I get annoyed. I'll be annoyingly distracted if we keep saying Western civilization because there's some exceptions there, and let's just talk about.
No, I'm happy with that. I am always troubled in the other direction, right? When we talk as if America is bigger than it is, when in fact it is sort of bigger than it is because it caught on.
Lots of it is. Yeah. So I know you, based on everything you said, you wouldn't disagree with that, but it would.
Yeah.
We can
easily
getting distracted on a side tangent if we just talked about America. So, but back to the more interesting part of what you were saying. So, the funny thing about America, and this is just like, not a particularly deep point other than a coincidence of history, but it's kind of interesting, is that 1776 was actually the year of both the Declaration of Independence and the Wealth of Nations. Sort of interesting, right? And so there's something about American identity, and the last part of what you said really struck a chord with me, right? Evolved to collaborate to compete, right? There's both elements woven into it's like the mother and the father of America, the collaboration and the competition, democracy and capitalism, individualism and unity, the Declaration of Independence and the Wealth of Nations. It's a funny thing in America that both of them are our parents. And then a big part of my work over the last several years before the presidency was actually sometimes when the parents run roughshod over each other, you have to keep them apart. That's what stakeholder capitalism, ESGism is all about, actually, is the merger of the two impulses, or the two, I guess we can call them impulses.
Disastrous merger.
Yeah, it's the disastrous merger where you are left with neither collaboration nor competition, but some perverse form of both. And then this is the dissolution of power between the state and the private sector that then creates, this is in a different context, a greater threat to American identity and liberty and prosperity than if they were kept apart. But that's getting into my land. We can go there if you want, but I'm more interested in your land. But that's interesting. So I actually buy your account, and I think that makes me more optimistic about what's possible for the continuation in the future of our experiment, because it points us in the direction of some things that I think we can deliver that will help get us there. I mean, I actually am the pro-growth candidate in this race. I think it does get to a bit of a mystery where if you believe what I do about growth, which is that most of our obstacles to growth, at least in America right now, were self-inflicted, but that's not a dour diagnosis. It actually should be uplifting, because it means that we can self-liberate from those restraints. Constraints on American energy: drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear. Number one input to growth. Number two, put people back to work. How do you want to do that? Well, stop paying them to stay at home to start. It's the number one obstacle to the growth of any business is they can't hire people right now. And I could go on. Reform of the Federal Reserve. I've written extensively about that, which we can get into if you really want to get ready for bed. But or some people like this stuff, and I can go into it. But my point, administrative state. But then we know what we can do to restore those conditions of growth, against the backdrop of which it's much easier for, as you said, evolution to stabilize just to provide stability to that form of collaboration, which is otherwise tenuous, and against the backdrop conditions of plenty, it becomes that much easier to do. So I'm not one of these pro-growth people that believes that's the entirety of the story. I do think that there's an identity vacuum that is upstream of our stagnation and growth that has to be independently addressed in our country. It's a big part of what I'm stepping up to do in this race. But I agree with you that a high growth environment certainly greases the wheels and opens the heart to a vision of identity that's healthy if you're actually delivering growth. And so tangibly, I think that's something I'm going to do as the next president. But I don't think it's the entirety of the story where there's a deeper void of purpose and meaning in the American soul that we still need to fill if we want to go the distance of bequeathing the experiment to the next generation.